My name's Rick Felumlee. Our farm is Mayapple Farms. We live near Dresden, Ohio, and we've been forest farming for 6 or 7 years now. Jan and I both have always had an interest in growing plants, you know, in a garden, flowers, house plants, that type of thing, and that just gradually grew. I honestly couldn't tell you where I first learned about ginseng and how that original seed got germinated in my mind, but you know, once we did, we started the first year just planting a small patch, and then the next year a little bit bigger patch, and then finally moved into quantities that were more on a production level. Our total farm, we have 2 plots here at our residence is where we do our forest farming. We have about 5 to 5.5 acres of forest, and currently we have about 1.5 acres of the forest under production of some sort or another. We do a lot of our ginseng planting uses the wild simulated method, and essentially you're trying to duplicate the conditions in nature as closely as possible. It's a very low management type of system, so we'll go out into the woods in the fall, we'll plant the seeds, which is simply raking back an area of leaves, sprinkling out the seeds evenly, kind of tamping them in for good soil contact, and then raking the leaves back over top of them. That's about all the management that ginseng will receive until it's ready to harvest, you know, 6, 7, 8 years after it's planted. We don't do any sort of fertilizing, irrigating, or really even hand weeding in that sort of system. We also have a little bit more intensive production system, more of a woods cultivated nursery area where we grow our propagation stock for plants like black cohosh, blue cohosh, golden seal, a few varieties of trilliums. Ginseng is definitely our primary crop. That's where our focus is, and it's largely due to market conditions. The economics of growing ginseng are a lot more favorable than some of the other plants that I mentioned. Second to ginseng would probably be golden seal, and there's an established and growing market for golden seal. And so those would be the 2 that we would focus on, likely marketing direct to the botanical industry. One of the big challenges with ginseng is from the long growth cycle. So it's many years, 6 to 8 years between planting the seed and harvesting. So we looked for crops that would sort of fill that gap time-wise and be a bridge so we could be producing income while we're waiting for our ginseng to mature. And the mushrooms fit perfectly into that. They have a very short growth cycle on outdoor on logs. It could be anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, which sounds long, but compared to ginseng, it's not bad. That's part of the reason we got started into producing mushrooms. We do grow them on outdoor on logs here using a couple different methods. We also have an indoor production system going at our other location. The advantage to the indoor is that you can have a lot more consistent production, you can grow more varieties, and you know, have a more regular supply for your customers when you're going to markets on a weekly basis. The outdoor methods is our preferred method. It's more sustainable. There's a lot less plastic and packaging and transportation involved, but the downside is you're at the mercy of Mother Nature to a large extent as far as when temperature and moisture levels are right, you know, to trigger a fruiting. So, but both very interesting. Mushrooms are something that I personally find fascinating. It fits nicely into our overall forest management plan because whenever we have damaged trees that need to come down or trees that come down in a storm, we can immediately use those to grow, you know, some variety of productive mushrooms on. A couple things that we learned the hard way early on. One was purchase quality seeds. Make sure you're purchasing quality seeds, and then take care of those seeds after you receive them if you're not able to plant them. The other tip, the first year that we planted, it was a little earlier in the season, maybe mid-September, and in this area, there's a lot of dry weather that time. So the first year we planted and then had about a solid month without rain. So I was constantly out here with the hose trying to keep things irrigated so those seeds wouldn't dry out and die. So years following that, we waited until later in the season to plant, more beginning to mid-October. And by then it seems pretty reliable that the weather has cooled off and there's a little more moisture in the air. So the timing of the planting, we're waiting longer. Also, just a small tip is plant right before it rains. Wait until a big rain is in the forecast and then go out and get your planting done, and that really seems to help establish those seeds and improve germination overall. And there's a lot of opinions about site selection and the orientation of the hill, whatnot. Typically northeast facing hills are what's preferred in the literature, and that does seem to work just fine. However, we've had equal success on the west side of our hill. We've had success under oak and ash trees, also under maple trees. So I guess the one thing I've learned is ginseng is maybe a little more versatile than my initial research led me to believe. So I think it's maybe a little more hardy and adaptable than we give it credit for. We keep pretty detailed records, partly due to our certified organic status. Part of that's a requirement of that, but it also it fits in nicely with our forest farming. It helps us track things, and really we can learn a lot, like you mentioned, from our own experience. But I think primarily as we focus more on the forest farming aspects, we'll be looking towards the botanical industry as a potential buyer for our product. We're fairly small, but we're growing, and I think going into it with the certified organic status and having experience with that for a few years may help us fill a niche in that industry. With no plans right now to delve too far into the value-added products, that's kind of a whole nother layer of regulations and knowledge that we don't quite have yet. But yeah, I think right now the direct-to-consumer and eventually moving more into supplying the botanical industry is where we'd like to be in 5 years. I think the biggest challenge is balancing time between it's a large commitment of time, and balancing that time between the farm and family life. Kids, we've got 2 young kids in school and sports, and I think just like any other family or any other person who's in business for themselves, time management becomes pretty crucial. Because of the time challenges that I mentioned, time management challenges, I've become a pretty detailed plans about what we want the next month to look like, what we want next season to look like, and then more into the future on a more like 5-year basis. Beyond that, it's very difficult to plan things. We have lots of to-do lists and calendars with schedules just to make sure that everything's getting done, relatively on time, nothing's falling through the cracks and getting out ahead of us. So just taking the time to plan, write things down, schedule, and learn as you go. That's been the biggest things that we've learned to help us deal with the challenges of being a very small, tiny operation with just the 2 of us running it. So, I guess it's been really shocking to me coming into this, say 7, 8 years ago without a lot of knowledge about these plants and the mushrooms. It's really been shocking to me when you take these items out to market how much interest there is from the local community. They're all items that you don't see a lot, and I think that's part of it. But it also generates a good conversation with the customers about the plants themselves, the threatened status of some of them and why we do what we do. We've had some consultations with both the Ohio Department of Forestry. They've been here to kind of give us some tips on managing the forest. And then we've also worked quite a bit with Rural Action, and through different workshops and conferences that they've hosted, that's kind of where we got our initial knowledge base on the whole forest farming aspect of our operation. With forest farming, a lot of people aren't familiar with it, but once you start becoming interested in it, you learn there's quite a community around it. Fortunately for us, aside from just a small amount of deer browse, we've been fairly lucky with pests and around our ginseng and native plants. I'm sure we lose a few to deer browse, probably to a few to rodent damage that we don't notice, but it's nothing that's been on a large scale, fortunately for us. And again, I think that one of the things that's been more shocking is kind of how adaptable and survivable those plants are, put back in their native habitat. Having dogs around helps a lot to keep the deer away and other animals generally. We do kind of let our dogs roam free around the property most of the time, and that's been very effective at keeping deer down. Around our more intensely managed areas, our woods cultivated areas, we've got it all fenced, and then under the lower portion we've got an extra, tighter rodent fence that's buried about 6 inches in the ground, just to keep things like moles and voles and other small rodents out of the area. So.